Welcome to the Life in Michigan podcast. Life in Michigan is more than an online magazine. We share the stories, experiences, and vibrant personalities that make the Great Lakes state truly unique. In this podcast, we bring you inspiring, heartwarming, and sometimes unexpected conversations with people who call Michigan home. From the rugged beauty of the Upper Peninsula to the bustling creativity of Kalamazoo, we'll cover the stories and define what it means to live, work, and play in Michigan. Today on Life in Michigan, we are joined by historian Dianna Higgs Stampfler, the author of Kalamazoo County Characters. Dianna has deep roots in Southwest Michigan, and her latest book is a love letter to the curious, quirky, and sometimes forgotten figures who helped shape Kalamazoo County's history. So crack open the burners and get cozy. This one's full of heart, history, and Michigan magic. All right. Dianna, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
We're doing fantastic. So are you still digging out from the snow? Because I think Gaylord had like record snow this year.
Yeah, I don't know if we quite made it to 200 inches, but we were almost there. But it has been warming up. It was in the 50s. We're looking at 60s. And my indicator of what our snowfall is like is the picnic table in the front yard. And as I look out now, I have seen the top of the picnic table for the first time since before Thanksgiving.
Oh, man.
Wow.
That's
And it
awesome.
had like 4 feet on it. Like I guarantee you, if I put one of my granddaughters in that, she'd get lost in the snowbank. So there is that. We're working toward it. Hopefully, I mean, the skiers have had their winter.
Yeah.
I'm ready for spring.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although now it's mud season, so
And ice.
yeah.
We have a lot of ice.
Yeah. Yeah.
They actually ripped off part of our roof
Oh,
this
good
winter.
Lord. Wow.
Yeah. So that's been fun.
So, I mean, obviously we know you, but why don't you tell?
Who are you? Do I know
Yeah, we're Brenda and Chuck, right?
You look familiar to me.
Yeah. But I don't know if our listeners know it's you as well. Probably not. Maybe, I don't know. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the background, and maybe a little bit about your book.
I was born on a warm summer day, I think. I don't know. I was born in the summer. I was actually born, I'm going way back because it's part of the story, actually. I was born on May 30th, 1969, in Kalamazoo. So I took my first breath in Kalamazoo. But I was also born on my brother's 5th birthday,
Oh.
which was interesting. My mom had some good timing, let me tell you. 5 years happy with that of my arrival that day because he had to cancel his birthday party. And then for the next 3 or 4 years, well, actually for longer than that, actually, we celebrated our birthdays together. And back in the 70s, Memorial Day was always May 30th. It wasn't always the last Monday that it is now. That came about when I was, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years old. So it was always a holiday and there was always a parade and we would go to our grandparents' cottage for our birthday. So we have birthday pictures of my first, his 6th, my second, his 7th, my third, his 8th. I know I have at least those 3 years early on. So that's kind of a funny part of this whole story. When I actually started working on Kalamazoo County Characters, I knew Kalamazoo was a big part of my life. I mean, I went to college there. That's where, before that in high school, like we didn't have a mall in Plainwell where I grew up. You went to the mall in Kalamazoo. When we went school shopping, you went to Kalamazoo. We didn't have a Walmart back then. We didn't even have a Meijer back then. You went to Kalamazoo to go to Meijer or to go to Montgomery Ward's or Sears or J.C. Penney.
J.C. Penney, yeah.
You know, you went to Kalamazoo. Everything in my childhood was centered when it wasn't in Plainville or Otsego where I was raised, it was in Kalamazoo. And so that kind of was part of what led to this latest book, Kalamazoo County Characters. I had actually was in I don't even know if it was like a Walgreens, and I saw another book from the publisher called Local Luminaries. And it was about famous people or noteworthy people from Bay City, I think. And I thought, well, if Bay City can have a book all about the famous people from their town, man, I can write one about Kalamazoo. And so my dad, who has his own noteworthy Kalamazoo story that I'll tell you later, um, he and I kind of started emailing each other, and I said, I think I'm going to do this book about Kalamazoo characters. Who should I put in it? And we came up with a list of like 150 people.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And had to go through and narrow that whole thing down. But there are 50 in the book. But I drew from people that I'd heard about that I was always fascinated with, or people from Kalamazoo who I knew or had amazing stories. Um, and drew from my time in Kalamazoo, whether that was, you know, hanging out there at a conference and learning about different things. You know, I, as an example, as a kid, we used to go to the museum in Kalamazoo, the Kalamazoo Valley Museum. We used to be in the library when I was younger, and then they moved it to its own library. But they have a noteworthy exhibit. They have a mummy. And I remember
Oh.
going to see this mummy. Well, then as I was working on this book, I'm like, well, how did Kalamazoo get a mummy?
Right.
Like, where did that come from? Which led me to researching the gentleman who was a collector of all kinds of antiquities, who acquired it from kind of like a World's Fair in California, had it himself for a long time. I don't know, is it like in his parlor? Like, hey, come see my mummy.
Right.
But he ultimately donated it to the museum. So it's it was like things like that that just sparked my imagination. There's a very active Facebook group called Vanished Kalamazoo, and they're posting all kinds of things about bars that are gone and people that are gone and restaurants and who remembers going here and doing this. And there were some people that I drew from the book from that.
Oh.
That they kept posting pictures, or particularly around Christmas time, um, of this old couple who played Santa and Mrs. Claus. And so I was like, well, who are these people? Because you know what? They look familiar to me. They look like people that I knew, like people that I had my pictures taken with. Well, it turns out it was the same Santa that my brother and I went to see when we were kids, and his name was Darwin Brown, his wife Opal, and he played Santa at the Gilmore Brothers store for years, but he also was a clown. He like did Brownie the Clown. Well, that brought up a whole nother set of memories because I was in our 4-H club because we were in the city.
Uh-huh.
We were city kids. We didn't have animals. We got to go to to do clown classes in 4-H. So I felt
Really?
a kinship with Brownie the Clown and Santa Claus. So sometimes these stories are just so obscure, but I hope that they really create some memories for people when they read this and go, "Oh, I met that Santa Claus," or "I went and saw that mummy and I always wondered
Yeah.
about it."
Yeah. Well, from reading those stories, I was just like blown away by, you don't think of Kalamazoo as being a really big city, uh, but there's been a lot of history there. I mean, I knew
Yeah.
about Gibson, because
Right.
I'm totally into guitars and music, uh, but I had no idea that celery was like king, like that it was like this like prized crop for one, and that Kalamazoo was like the heartland for celery. I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah, and an interesting story about George Taylor, who was the Celery King. Um, he came to Kalamazoo in the 1850s from Scotland, where his family had started to come in. And he talks, I have this letter that he wrote. He goes, Brother James proposed to me to let me have a piece of his land opposite the Mountain Home Cemetery as a nursery. And so I looked out to find a house for my family most convenient to this. The only one I found was an old one on the corner below the cemetery belonging to Charles Stewart, and the rent he charged was $2 a week. And I thought this very high for such a house. Um, Now, George is actually tied to my family. So George's brother was my great 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 grandfather.
Oh, really?
So you can thank my family for bringing celery to Kalamazoo and to Michigan and to the United States. Did you know? I mean, obviously you did if you read that chapter. Celery was for the rich and famous.
Yeah,
You know,
like
it was
served in
a
these crystal
delicacy.
things, like to keep
Yeah,
it cool
crystal
and crisp.
vases.
Yeah,
It was served in first class on the Titanic. Now today they'd be serving it in the basement in coach,
right.
in steerage.
Steerage.
But it was a pretty big deal, and George, he was the first to grow commercially, to grow celery. He introduced it to the Burdick Hotel, which is now the Radisson, where we hang out together
Yeah.
once a year. Um, and his niece actually married Frank Henderson, who built Henderson Castle. And he had a huge regalia company where he was like part of the Masons and the Oddfellows. Well, back in those days, those folks, those organizations had elaborate uniforms and hats and sashes and swords and all this. And he made his fortune in that arena and built this castle so that everybody in town would know how famous he was. And that castle still stands. And now it's a bed and breakfast and a French restaurant, and it's for sale if anybody's interested in buying it.
Wow.
So just these things again, people see this castle all the time when they drive West Main coming in and out of downtown Kalamazoo, but I don't think most people realize that it has that family connection to the Taylor family and the celery, because the original nursery that George ran was right near there because the cemetery is right across the street.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, it's just wild that there's like just all those different connections. And then, it's also really interesting that that connects to your family. And so you mentioned that your dad had been, was, well, obviously born and raised in Kalamazoo as well. So, how did he influence your book?
So, my dad is a historian, a genealogist, a storyteller. And so my passion for all of these things, for communicating, for my original broadcasting, my journalism, family history, all of that stems back from my dad. I remember being in fourth grade, somewhere between fourth and fifth grade. For me, my brother was 5 years older. We went on a genealogical tour to Gettysburg. I thought it was the most boring trip ever. I mean, I'm 10. What 10-year-old girl wants to go to battlefields and cemeteries and do all of that kind of stuff? I thought it was horrible, and thank God for Beverly Cleary and Judy Blume books that got me through that summer. Um, but in later years, when I started to, I've always been a writer, but when I started having an appreciation for the research part and the history of and things like that, I kept going back in my head to that summer of, standing there next to my dad in a library or at a town hall, feeding dimes into the microfilm machine. Because
Oh,
back
yeah.
then, that's how you got your copies of everything. And I still can remember the whizzing of the microfilm through the machine, the sound that it made,
Yeah.
and of going to cemeteries. And back then, you could do rubbings. They don't want you to do that now; it damages them. But all of those things, as I started to get really deep into this, I realized that my dad had instilled in me just by having me be part of that as a child. And so when he's always been my biggest cheerleader. He's helped me with my other books and has been helping me with research on various projects over the years for articles and stuff. And so when this book came about and I reached out to him and I said, this is what I'm gonna do. It's a book about notable people from Kalamazoo. And he helped me with the initial list. So I had a list and he had a list, and then we had 150 on the list, and like, all right, well, these are the ones we know for sure we're going to do. And then there were others up until like the last month. I was swapping people out. But he would help me, or he'd see something and go, hey, like I'd be 80% done with the book and go, hey, did you think of a Princess Redfeather? And I'm like, well, no, she was from Plainwell. He goes, no, her shop was actually in Kalamazoo County. So then I had to pull somebody off the list to put Princess Redfeather on the list. And so he helped with that initial part. He helped research. I have my own access to newspapers.com and Ancestry and stuff, but he helped me with, doing stuff for that. He proofread every chapter.
Oh.
The only thing he didn't read was the introduction or the tribute to him. He didn't know that. But his story, his Kalamazoo story, is actually the last chapter in the book. And I toyed with not letting him read it, because his story is actually the one that is the most important to me, obviously, in this book. And a story I've been telling for years. But part of me was like, well, maybe I won't let him see it and he'll just be surprised when the book comes out. But then I thought, well, if I get anything wrong, then I'm going to be in really big trouble. So I remember it was the last one that I wrote. It was the last one that he proofed. And I sent it over to him thinking, oh my gosh, he's going to lose it. And he emails it back and he goes, change this, change that, like a couple of minor things. And he goes, I don't even know why I'm in this book.
Oh.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, your story has always been my favorite Kalamazoo story to tell. And it was the reason for the book. And he's like, yeah, whatever, whatever. So thankfully, I let him read it because he passed away last May. And he would have never seen the finished book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, interestingly enough, he missed one major typo in the book in his chapter,
I know. I saw
and that was his
that.
birthday.
I know.
I saw
He got-
1964 and I go, wait a minute.
That's
I was
not
born in
right.
64.
Yeah, that was the year my brother was born. My dad was born in 44. So even he, I think he was just overwhelmed with it at that point.
Yeah.
So I actually have my copy. I've been editing my copy so you can see. I
Oh, you
had to
got- Yeah.
I had to write it in. Like I found like 3 mistakes in this book since it came out, which is always troublesome. But that was a pretty
Stressing.
bad one. The fact that he totally missed his own birthday. I'm like, how is that possible? He was born 4 months after his first child. That just doesn't make sense.
So, like,
Oops.
how did you decide which? I mean, like, did you have like so many characters you wanted in the book? Did you have a page limit? How did you set the parameters for, you know?
Well, originally, I wanted to do a lot more, but the publisher is really good. They don't give you a ton of rules. Word count is a big one though. Like you have to be within a range. And I knew how I wanted the book when I got done to lay out. I wanted it to be two pages each, one photo. I wanted the consistency. And I was very adamant when normally the publisher will do their own deal and do what they want. And I said, I just really have it in my head that I want it this way. And I said, in doing that, can you tell me in a 2-page spread with a photo approximately how many words I would need for each person? And they came back to say, 600 to 650. And I'm like, all right, great. So I set out to make sure that all the profiles were no more than 650 words, except for my dad's, which is the last chapter, which has special consideration. And he has more than one photo. He's got 4. And so that narrowed it down. I probably could have put 10 more people in and been within my word count, but 50 just seemed like
Yeah. It's
kind of a
good.
logical number.
Even number.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and in choosing the people, so from that original list of 150, I knew the categories. I knew I wanted those founding fathers or early
Mhm.
pioneers. I knew I wanted people like in that innovation world.
Yep.
I wanted people, and then some of the other ones came to be like the civic leaders or the political people, authors and artists, some of those kind of things. But I also was trying to get people from various time periods, and there were fewer than 10 that were still alive, and sadly 2 have died since the book came out. So my dad and then Gene the Pumpkin Man passed away just recently as well. I wanted to make sure I had enough women in there, which was really a little bit more challenging in those earliest years because, the women they were coming with their husbands, but a lot of them weren't, making their place in history. And I was also trying to be diverse in having people of color or people of different religious backgrounds in
So
there.
very
So
balanced
yeah,
kind of.
I tried. Yeah, I really, really tried to make sure that everyone or that there was at least representation from as many groups as possible in there. Um, it was also interesting to note that when I was going through, like, I'm going to use for an example, let me go through the list here. Um, so, one of the more noted names in Kalamazoo is, of course, William Upjohn. He founded
Hmm.
Upjohn, which became Pharmacia, which became Pfizer, you know, which
Yep.
manufactures pills. They were the first ones to come up with a pill that would dissolve in your stomach. Of course, they're known for, you know, our COVID vaccine and Viagra. So, you know,
There
they
you
have,
go.
they're well known in history. And so I thought, well, okay, it makes sense to have William Upjohn. But I thought, well, everybody in town knows the William Upjohn story. And as I went through doing his, like, for everybody, I tried to do like a genealogical profile. And I found out that his dad, Uriah, was equally fascinating, and a little bit even more so because he and his brother William came to America, and then they of course landed in New York. And then they both went to medical school, and he and his brother ended up in the Kalamazoo area. Uriah ended up in Richland, which is in Kalamazoo County. His brother was in Hastings, which is in Berry County. They were both doctors, country doctors. And Uriah traveled on horseback. He would collect things from nature and make salves and medicines. He was like an herbalist,
Yeah.
and he and his wife had like 10 or 12 kids, and like 6 or 7 of them all went to U of M,
Wow.
including 3 daughters. One
Wow.
daughter became a doctor, 2 daughters became pharmacists. And then, of course, his son William, and there were a couple other brothers that were involved in the Upjohn Company. And I just got like, I couldn't get Uriah's story out of my head. And so I decided, you know what? William is out, Uriah is in.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's kind of how that particular story transitioned. So there were several instances where, you know, I set out with one person in mind, and in doing the research on that one person, I found somebody else in the family that I felt had a better story or a more compelling story. So there were a lot of those changes during that time period.
Awesome.
So how did you pick? Did you get to pick the cover, or did they come up with the cover, your publisher?
They came up with the cover, the selection, and of course, again, they're trying to pick different people from different walks of life. I would have done it a little bit different because, that's Joseph Westnich in the upper left, Mersey Tate in the center, and then the gentleman with the microphone, that's John Fetzer, who actually ended up owning the Detroit Tigers years
Oh,
later. And then Sue Parrish is the pilot. And then that's Rem Wall in the center with the guitar, which is I think a Gibson, and then Gwen Frostick, who was an artist. So Rem Wall and John Fetzer were their stories are so closely aligned because Rem's show was on Fetzer Broadcasting.
Okay.
So like I would have picked somebody from a different chapter, a different sector, but I think they were looking for people that told a story just from their photo. Like that guitar helps tell that story, that
yeah.
microphone helps tell that story. They had a different photo on the back cover, and this these decisions about the cover came after my dad had passed. In fact, my dad and I, the last conversation my dad and I had was about the book. And so they had a different cover photo on the cover on the back, which I had always recommended this one. And I went back to them and I said, I'm going to have to insist. Like, this is the situation. And this was like within a month after my dad died. And I'm like, that's my dad. The book is dedicated to my dad. This has to be the back cover photo.
Yeah.
And so they
They changed
agreed
it.
to that.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
So, you know, and if you'll notice, like all three of my books have my maiden name on there as part of my byline. And I did that purposefully because I wanted my dad's family name to have the recognition in the Library of Congress.
Ah, nice.
And
Nice.
so when the first book came out, he didn't realize it was going to be in there.
Uh-huh.
And then he saw that. And so every book that I've had and will have that in there as a tribute to him and to my family history. So
That's fantastic. I
That
love that.
is.
Yeah,
That
I love
is.
that. So is there
So
any particular characters that were like that you covered that are really, like, either quirky or eccentric, or I mean, I'm sure there are a few from what I read, but any that really piqued your interest and were like, oh man, this
um
person.
yeah, for sure. Well, there's a couple, and I'll try not to get too detailed, then I could tell you about a few of them. One was a woman in the book. Her name was Sue Hubble. Um, and Sue Gilbert Hubble, Gilbert was her maiden name. She was an author. She wrote for the New Yorker, and I was actually introduced to her work in college. One of my English professors had introduced me to her work, and here's my like rubber banded copy of her book because I've read it so many times it's falling apart. And this one, she basically she was raised in Kalamazoo area. She gets married. She has a kid, and her husband decide in the 70s that they're going to be part of that off the grid movement. And so they move to the Ozark Mountains. They're going to live off grid, raise bees to make money, and they go and set up home there. Well, then they get divorced, and she decides to stay. And she ends up being a well-known writer for the New Yorker. And when I was in college, the New Yorker, and even today, I mean, the New Yorker was the place
Mm-hmm.
for feature content, or for, what memoir type content. And I'd always been fascinated with her work ever since college in the late 80s. And I have most of her books. And right about the time I was working on the book, I came across the paper I wrote for college about this book, and which prompted me to read it again and whatnot. And then I found out that she had passed away. So I'd always thought how cool it would be to meet her. I would never be able to do what she did, like live by myself all winter in the Ozarks and take care of bees and chickens and fix my own house and do all this
Right.
other stuff. But it was inspiring to read. And so I contacted her son, um who was a former legislator from Maine, and he like sent me stuff. I'm like, hey, I've always loved your mom's work and whatever, and I'm writing this book and she's in this book. And so he sent me photos. So
Oh
like
wow,
that
cool.
to me was like that was like a very kind of a spiritual moment. I've always wanted to, I don't know how to write a screenplay, but it's one of my dreams to write a screenplay about her life.
oh.
And I want Diane Lane to play her. I've already got like that much of it scoped out in my head.
Yeah, casting is done.
And yeah, so like it's just like one of those things that I've always been fascinated with. A couple other noteworthy people.
What's her name again, Diana?
It's Sue Hubble, Hubbell, and she's just her stuff is just like badass. Like she was living out there doing that all in her 70s. How cool is that?
It is pretty
Um,
cool.
Two other cool, interesting people. One is Mary Baker. She went by Bonnie, and you probably know her story quite well. It was actually on this weekend. If you've ever seen the movie A League of Her Own, A League of Their Own, the
Yes.
baseball
Oh
movie.
Yeah.
Well, she was the inspiration for Dottie the pitcher.
yeah.
Oh, that's right.
She
I
was a
remember.
baseball
Yes.
player
Yep.
from Kalamazoo. Well, she was from Canada, but she played for the Kalamazoo team. And I knew of her. I knew of the Kalamazoo Lassies, but I never knew that she was the inspiration for the movie. So that was kind of a fun, um, a little part of it as well.
Yeah.
Um, there was a gentleman who's still alive. His name is he was born and raised and went to Plainville High School. His name was Michael Walden. He was the drum major. My dad knew him. He was um younger than my dad, but my dad knew who he was. He was the drum major. He went to Western. He studied in music. And I knew him from the 80s because he was a record producer in California for people like Aretha Franklin and Whitney Houston. He did the soundtrack to The Bodyguard
Oh,
and
wow.
got whatever the music award, a Grammy award for
Grammy?
it.
Yeah. Wow.
And I met him. So the photo in the book is of me and him both at the Wine and Harvest Festival parade in 1987 when I was Miss Plainwell and he was the Grand Marshal. And we'd always kept in touch. And he played for Jeff Beck. He was the drummer for Jeff Beck when he was still alive, and he's still producing albums. He's in his 70s now. Goes by Narada, which is his spiritual name. And so he was one that was always on the list.
Yeah.
He got his start, though. I never knew this until the book. He got his start playing in like dive bars in Kalamazoo at the age of 11. He had like his own band, and they're letting him play at night in these north side Kalamazoo, you know, dive bars.
I
But
love it.
it was so inspiring. As a musician and a fan of music, I know you appreciate that.
Yeah.
Probably the most interesting character in the book is a woman by the name of Etta Fairchild. And this is another one rolling around in my head that might be worth its own book. We'll see. Etta Fairchild was living, her husband had passed and she was in her 80s. She was living in a nearby home for senior citizens, and she got invited to go have dinner with her former neighbors, and she thought, oh, how nice is this? So she goes over to their house a few blocks away, and she sits down to dinner, and turns out there is no dinner, and these former neighbors whack the lady. Like, they kill her. They strike her in the head, and they murder her, and they wrap her up in the rug from the dining room, and they throw her in a cistern in the backyard because they think she's a witch. Because like all these people around her keep dying. Well, they're dying because they're old. They're not dying but these neighbors were they were in like this cult, this religious cult, and they got it in their head somehow that this woman was a witch, and so they killed her. Well, then the stupid woman who did it, she calls the neighbor going, can you help us clean up and take care of the body and all this? And so the neighbor calls the cops, obviously, and the cops go over. And it was in all of this whole story, including original crime scene photos, was in True Detective magazine the next year.
Wow.
So I got a copy of it online. I've been scouring. I've got an eBay alert out in case that issue comes up so I can get the actual issue. But I went through and investigated a bunch of that, and then I went down to the archive library at Western, and they have the the old leather-bound logbooks, the typed out logbooks from the court. And so I found like the court transcripts of the trial of this woman and her husband. Now, he committed suicide, so he never went to jail. And she was ultimately given a second trial, and they determined that she was crazy, so she went to the asylum in Ionia for many years, and then she was finally let out until she died. But just to go through, flipping through these giant, I mean, they are huge, these giant, heavy court records from the 1920s, and scouring through and finding that information was just fascinating. I mean, I have that flair for the dark side. So that one fulfilled, that part of my fascination.
So we've kind of flipped through some of the characters in your book, and is there one you wanna share a little bit more? Could we entice you to do a little reading from your book?
Yeah, so I'm gonna do the one about my dad because I really want to tell that story. And I'm gonna try and get through it without crying.
Okay.
We'll see. So as we discussed earlier, he was born in 1944, not 64. But so my dad was born in Plainwell, went to Plainwell High School, and he got a radio when he was in high school, like one of those old ones that picks up stuff from way far away. I don't even know
Yeah.
what you call
Yeah,
them,
like a
but you know,
ham radio, basically.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's still at the house. It's still I think one of my kids or I will have it eventually. But um so he goes in within months after graduating from high school into this little radio station in nearby Otsego. The station was like basically in a single wide trailer down by the river. I kid you not.
Down by the river.
It was I have a picture of it down by the river. And he goes in and he gets hired to do news. So he starts working in radio. He's 17. Um, and from there, he gets hired at a station in Holland, which is where they were living in 64 when my brother was born. And then he gets hired at a station in Kalamazoo called WKMI. See, I'm wearing my KMI shirt today. This is actually from 1976. This is one of my dad's original t-shirts. And this is the era when AM radio was hot, like for music. And AM had and KMI had a strong signal. It was so cool. This is some of my greatest childhood memories. They had a swimming pool in the backyard. And so as kids on Saturdays in the summer, we would go when my dad got off the air at 10 in the morning, and we would have a picnic and go swimming in this pool. And I don't know how many times it happened in my life. It seemed like it was every other weekend. It was probably like a half dozen times in my life. But it just like I just still vividly remember the smell of the station, the sounds, the jukebox, the Coke machine with the glass bottles, and the swimming pool. And my dad's office. I always remember my dad's office. So he was working there. He was actually there for 17 years. So I'm going to read a little bit about this this famous instance that he had during his time there. So let's see. In the early 1970s, Jim, who's my dad, Jim helped an up-and-coming band make music history. In August of 1974, Electra Asylum released the single James Dean from the Eagles' third album, On the Border. The band, which formed in 1971, had earned a few top 10 hits but hadn't yet reached stardom. While the label was aggressively pushing James Dean, Jim chose to play a ballad written by Don Henley, Glenn Frey, and J.D. Souther. The song became an instant hit in the Kalamazoo market, and local record stores couldn't keep the album or 45 in stock. While James Dean struggled, never ranking higher than 77 on the charts, Jim was trying to convince executives to release that ballad as a single. Finally, on November 5th of 1974, it was released nationally and flew up the Billboard Hot 100 charts. By March of 75, the Eagles had landed their first #1 hit, Best of My Love. Later that year, Bert Stein and Rip Pelly, representatives from Electra Asylum, presented Jim with a framed band autographed copy of the album cover, which hung in his office for years. Following 13 years at WKMI, Jim moved on, blah, blah, blah. I want to kind of scan back down here because there's another part of this story. I thought maybe I had to have included it.
You did.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Where is it? I'm also working with defunct glasses right now. So here we go. Okay, so about the story about the Eagles' first #1 single was a family favorite, and became public in September of 2014 when the band performed at Van Andel Arena in Grand Rapids. Jim, who hadn't attended a concert in more than 30 years, was invited backstage with his family to meet the band. Later, during their performance of Best of My Love, the band publicly thanked Jim from the stage and later recounted the story to various media interviews, including one in Rolling Stone.
That's awesome, man.
Makes me
That was
wanna
a good
cry.
day.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
that's
know.
what.
That was a good day. The fact that, so kind of as a backstory, I had just moved up north in March of 2014, and they announced this concert at Van Andel, and I had kept in touch with I had interviewed or talked to one of those radio executives back when my dad hit 40 years in radio, and he ended up working in radio for 59 before he retired, to Bert Stein. And I'd kept in touch with him off and on over the years. And so when they announced on the radio that the Eagles were coming, I emailed him and I said, "Hey, Bert, I just heard that the Eagles are coming to Van Andel, and that's like a half hour from where my dad lives. And he's never seen the band perform. And I really would like to take him. It's his 70th birthday this year." And Bert emailed back within a couple of hours and said, "This sounds great. How many tickets do you want?"
Awesome.
And I said, "Well, is 6 too much to ask?" I should have said more, but is 6 too much to ask? He's like, "No." He says, "We'll have 6 tickets and backstage passes waiting for you at the show." So I called my dad and I'm like, "Hey, the show was in September of 14. I'm like, "Hey, what are you doing on?" It was like a Monday. My dad goes to bed at 8 o'clock at night. He rarely leaves the city limits, or didn't. I said, "Hey, what are you doing on Monday? Whatever." He goes, "Well, I I don't know why." I'm like, "Well, we're going to see the Eagles in Grand Rapids." And he's like trying to give me an excuse on why he can't go. And I'm just like, "No, we're going, and Bert has the tickets, and we're going backstage." And he said, "Are you kidding me?" And I'm like, "No, like Bert's arranging it all." And so, of course, the PR person in me goes, when we get closer to the date, I let our friend John Liberty, who was writing for M Live, know about the situation. And I said, "Listen, this hasn't really been publicized much, but like the Eagles are coming to town. And did you know that my dad was the DJ that got them their first #1 hit back in 74? And, or 75?" And he goes, "No." And so of course I'm feeding John all this information and the photo of my dad and Rip and Bert and everything. So the paper comes out that day of the concert. I'm still living up north, so I drive all the way down to go buy the last 5 copies of the Gazette from the Gazette office in Kalamazoo, then go pick up my dad at the show to take him to the show. So it's my dad, my stepmom, my 2 kids, and then my daughter, a friend of my daughter's at the time. And we go up there. I don't know if you've seen a show at Van Andel, but they have a little restaurant on site. And the chef there at the time was a friend of mine. And the people that run Van Andel, I know through my other work. And of course, it's been in the paper, so it's big PR for Van Andel as well. And my friend who works there came up to our table while we were sitting having dinner, and he slid the set list across to me, and he thought, "Well, you might want to have this for later." So we knew like how far
Yeah.
down
Yeah.
before they would play Best of My Love. So then we go downstairs, we meet the band. Um, Glenn Fry and Don Henley particularly, because they're original members, were so interested in talking to my dad because they had never, all they ever knew was that some DJ from Michigan
Yeah.
pushed the song. It was never supposed to be released as a single. And so they didn't really they didn't know the details of it. And so they sat there and talked to my dad. And it's funny because like we're standing back there, security's back there, and we're standing around, and Timothy B. Schmidt comes up and he shakes my hand. He goes, "I'm Timothy." And I'm like, "I know who you are. I know who you are." Great work. And I'm talking to, I have friends who are mutual friends of Joe Walsh. And so I'm like, "Hey, like, our mutual friend Rick says hello," and like we're just chilling. And then they're like, "All right," Glenn Fry's like, "All right, let's get some pictures." So they took one with my dad by himself, and then they took one of us together, and I'm sitting there and I'm like freaking out because my arm is around Don Henley and Joe Walsh is standing over my shoulder. And I've met celebrities before. I mean, I've met tons of bands.
Yeah.
But come on, this is the Eagles. Like,
Yeah.
this is some serious stuff. So we're back there, we get all the photos, and then they're going to take us out from behind stage to our seats. We don't have to go back out around the way we came. So we're delayed. We delayed the show like 10 or 15 minutes. We're walking back by, and Caleb is with us, right? So
Yeah.
like he sees all the guitars lined up. I'm like, "Buddy, don't you even touch those." Like you could just see him wanting to pick up a guitar and go on stage. And so they get us to our seats, the band comes on, the show starts, and then we know, like when they're getting to the Best of My Love, it's a ballad, so of course the lights come down, and Glenn Fry gets up there and he's just like, "Hey, like, he's like strumming. We were never really planning to release this as a single from our On the Border album and stuff, but we just met this DJ from Kalamazoo out back, and he pushed this song through, and it ended up becoming our first #1 hit. We just want to thank Jim for that and for being with us
Oh,
tonight." So we're all crying. My dad's crying. Everybody in our row is crying. my phone's blowing up because all my friends that are there are like,
Yeah.
oh my God, they're talking about you. And it was a pretty magical night. And then of course there was a bunch of stories about it. The paper called my dad the next day and did another story. And then when Glenn Fry died the next year, um, they brought them all back up again. And
Yeah.
then that same year, Rolling Stone came up with one of their special edition magazines, those, $12 versions. And Don Henley talked about my dad in there as well. And I guess they talked about it anytime that they were performing in Michigan. They would bring that story up on stage because a friend was in Detroit at the show and
Uh,
said they talked about it over there
oh,
as
wow.
well.
Wow. That's,
So,
yeah. Yeah.
I
But
mean,
you don't realize the power of just one person promoting something, right? I mean,
yeah,
granted your dad was a DJ, but that was, he had a sense that this is a
yeah.
much better song and, you guys need to, if you want to be successful, this is what you need to do. And then, the
Yeah.
Eagles are the Eagles, right? They're huge now, right?
Like, and I mean, granted, they probably still would have taken off. They probably
Oh
still
yeah.
wouldn't have
Yeah.
gotten another number one hit, but how long would it have taken?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like, you just don't know. Like, maybe, maybe that break was what turned the trajectory. You
Yeah.
just never know.
Yeah. Well,
So,
it was a pivotal time because I know that from just the things I've read about Joe Walsh and the Eagles in general, like after their first album, those second two were kind of they were on the a little bit on the skids with their label if they didn't get
mhm,
some more action, and so that helped them.
yeah. Well, and the date for that to hit number one was March 5th or March 1st of 75. So I just did a little write up on my website, a little blog post all about like tracking it. So back then the radio stations would come out with these weekly bullets of like new hits or what's things to watch, what to track. And it had like the top 30. And so this woman that used to work with my dad in radio and was a big fan of his at KMI in the 70s had a bunch of these. I mean, they were colored prints. We still have a bunch of them. And so she basically cataloged it all. And together, we put together this like from the time the album came out to when my dad first played Best of My Love to when the label released it to when it hit. Like it's like a week by week chart of watching it move,
Watch it,
which was super fascinating.
yeah.
It only stayed at number one for 1 week, but
It
Hey,
hit
it's number one.
it
number
yeah,
one.
yeah.
So have
So,
you, there's two things that I've been thinking about, and they weren't really on my original list of questions, but as you were talking, I was like, do you have like an audience in mind for this book when you were writing it? Like, is it people from people in Kalamazoo obviously would be interested in it, but did you have a broader audience in mind? I mean, like who were you thinking of anybody particularly?
Well, this one is much narrower in focus, and I don't anticipate it, taking off the way the Lighthouse ones do. So it is primarily Kalamazoo based. Um, but there are several people like Sue Parrish, who's on the cover. She was a pilot. She founded the Kalamazoo Air Zoo,
Okay.
the Aviation History Museum, with her husband, and I'm actually doing a special event with them on the first Sunday of May, focused in on all the women in the book.
oh, cool.
Oh,
And
cool.
so they're selling this book in their gift shop. Don Gilmore, who founded the Gilmore Car Museum, is in the book, and they're selling it there. Ironically, the Upjohn, Susan was an Upjohn, and the Upjohn and Gilmore families are intertwined due to marriage at a point in the family history. So there are certain entities who um, have museums attached to them that would buy it.
Hmm.
But this was one where I wasn't really focused in on how many I could sell, more so of just telling some of these stories. So I don't anticipate, when I get my first royalty check from this one, I don't anticipate it's going to be uh, too terribly big. The number of presentations are kind of limited because I don't think anybody from Kalamazoo or from Traverse City or Ann Arbor is going to hire me to come in and talk on
You
this
never
topic. It's
know.
it's pretty limited. Um, but I guess it was just one that I felt needed to be there for the historical value,
Yeah. Yeah.
to
And to,
have it
Yeah.
there and
yeah.
have it in different. I mean, it does cover the whole Kalamazoo County area. So like I'm giving a presentation in summer in Vicksburg. I can do Oshtemo, I can do I've done Parchment. So, and when I give the book talks on these, they're all very different because when I gave a version in Plainwell because ironically, 7 people from Kalamazoo also had ties to Plainwell. My dad, Narada Michael Walden, Princess Redfeather, Dwight Waldo, who was the first president of Western Michigan University. He was born and raised in Plainwell. Um, Fletcher Ransom, who is a well-known artist, was born in Kalamazoo but lived for many years in Plainwell. So when I speak in Parchment, I focus in on the people that are from that neighborhood first.
Yeah.
So there are different versions, and I can also, in those presentations, add some of the people that didn't make the cut.
Right.
Oh yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? So, for example, when I did the book launch in Kalamazoo, at the public library just down from the Radisson, there were 4 or 5 people in that presentation that weren't in the book because, like, I found out after the book came out, there really was a gal from Kalamazoo. Like, Glenn Miller had a song called "I've Got a Gal in Kalamazoo." Turns out there was really a gal. I didn't know it at the time. And so she's in the presentation. Turns out she was best friends with Sue Parrish, who founded the Air Zoo, which I just found out from reading Sue's book that I didn't even know existed until a month ago, and now I have it. So I can create presentations, so each one is different, which is also helpful to send people in from different libraries to have them come back.
Yeah.
So that's a different thing about this one, is that even though there are only 50 people in the book, presentations can encompass a broader range of those people.
Or have a
So that's
theme.
kind of fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a
yeah,
theme.
or
Like
a
it could
theme.
be, yeah, could be
So
more
yeah, like
like
so the women, Larry Bell, our friend Larry Bell is in this book. In fact, he autographed my copy
Oh, nice.
when he
all
came and
right.
bought it at the conference
Oh, he did?
in Kalamazoo. And I said, all right, I'll sell you one, but you have to autograph mine. And so after he autographed it, he's like, that's $25, please. But like in the one I gave in Kalamazoo, I talk about this woman who was an early brewer in Kalamazoo. Her last name was Birchnell, and turns out she was related to Joseph Westnedge, who's on the cover. Again, there were so many
Yeah.
intertwinings, and I didn't realize it until you got into it all that Kalamazoo is really a small place, and the interconnectedness of the stories was quite fascinating.
So I have so many questions about your research process, like how you go, how you dig into that. But like that could be like a podcast on itself. Like let's talk about how you research these, like how do you like go about like outlining your research? I mean, I would love to spend hours talking about that.
And it's fascinating. In fact, the research element of it is what I enjoy the most. So a lot of it, like I said, I do a family tree kind of dive on people. So obviously Google's the first thing that I look for, or if there are sources like the Air Zoo or Gilmore Car Museum, I can ask them for some research. But I'm going to ancestry.com or familysearch.com and I'm looking for family trees, and especially for the ones that for people that are lesser known. I'm going to newspapers.com and I'm looking for the earliest references of a particular person, or digging through. Sometimes, like we go back to Etta Fairchild, the woman who was killed for being a witch. Finding that newspaper article about True Detective was on a blog that somebody wrote about. So then I went searching for it from there, and then relying on local libraries. And that was a huge thing, especially with photo acquisition. is, I had a great relationship or built one up with the Kalamazoo Valley Museum, the Kalamazoo Public Library, and the Western Library. And they either did research or opened up their facilities to me. And the Kalamazoo Valley or the Kalamazoo Public Library, I mean, they're also there for the people. And so their archives are there to be utilized. Their photo access is there for you to use as long as you give credit back. And so it was building those extensive relationships, but some of it was interviews. So I told you about Sue Hubble's son, Gene the Pumpkin Man, Gene Rhodes, who just passed away. He had been selling pumpkins up on the hill on West Main for over 50 years. And during the conference last year, I had reached out to him through Facebook, and his daughter was managing the Facebook, so she contacted him and he invited me to his house. And so on the Tuesday before the conference, or maybe it was the Monday, one of the days, I went over to his house on West Main and sat at his kitchen table for 2 hours and just talked to him.
Oh man. So
And
cool.
I was one of the last people to actually interview him because, he passed away just recently. So he's kind of that. But I have a couple friends who are writers that do historic true crime. One's name is Tobin Book, and he did a thing with the Historical Society of Michigan, like one of their Zooms about how he does his research on historic true crime, like where he finds the articles, where he finds the court records, all of that kind of stuff. And then another guy from Lansing area, his name is Rod Sadler. He wrote a fascinating book about this murder of a woman that took place in the 50s on Mackinac Island, and it's unsolved.
Oh.
And he's written several historic true crimes, and he's giving a talk at the UP, like there's a UP writers group. And in May, he's giving a session on that topic. So I'm going just to listen to him talk about, because I keep saying to him, like, you should do it. If I host a Zoom, will you talk about how you do that? And he goes, oh, I'm doing it for the UP Writers Conference. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to the UP Writers Conference then.
So when is the UP Writers Conference? Maybe we need to.
It is, I think it's May 16th. So it is May 17th. It's a Saturday. It's like their spring meeting, so it's a free meeting. You just have to be a member, and I think a membership is like $40 or $50. You might need to look at that. I'll send it to you.
I might need to look at it. We will be in Ireland.
Oh, okay. Well, then you won't be there.
Yeah, maybe next year. Maybe I have to follow.
Maybe they'll record it or something.
Yeah.
You want me to hold my phone down here and just?
Yeah. In my spare time, I want to figure out how to get more information about that. So where can our listeners get more information about your book, or get information to book you if they're like, hey, I want to have Dianna come in and do a talk at my local library? Like, how can they get more information about you?
So they could just go to my website at promotemichigan.com. There's a tab for books, which will have all of my books, and they can all order them there. And those all come autographed, no extra charge. And this is where I'm going to give my little tout about buy local from your author whenever possible, because we writers don't get rich on selling our books. So if you buy my book from Amazon, you're basically giving $12 to Jeff Bezos, and he doesn't really need it, and I get $1.
Oh man.
$1.
So my contract is 8% of the wholesale price, and they get it for half off, so it's 8% of $12. I get 80 cents for the haunted books, the lighthouse books. Now, that being said, several local bookstores will also carry my books, which is fine. I don't mind supporting local bookstores. My proceeds for me are the same, but that's fine. We're supporting another small business, and I'm all about that.
Yeah.
But whenever possible, buy direct from your author. Thank you for your purchase, by the way. I really do appreciate it. So there's that. On there is a speaker bureau tab, and that will have all of my presentations. It details about the prices and things like that. And then on the right-hand side is the list of all the upcoming programs that I have booked and what those topics are. So there are several of them coming up, and I'm always adding to them. I literally have 5 of them in the hopper right now. But those ones there are all the public ones. This year seems to be a lot of interest in private ones as well. So,
Interesting.
one moment, my doorbell is ringing. I didn't even know I had a doorbell.
Oh, no.
Goodness. Hold on just a second.
Okay.
Can we hold for a sec?
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we can
I
just
think
cut
it's
this
the
part out.
insurance adjuster. Sorry about that.
I guess I have one more question, and it's about do you have any more any other projects, any other books in the works that we might want to know about?
No, what I have is 5 magazine article deadlines that I'm past due on,
Uh-oh.
including, yeah. No, I'm working on several articles for Michigan History Magazine right now. So, but no book projects. They take me about 2 to 3 years to research.
Yeah.
These people that can punch out 2 or 3 in a year, and they must not have other jobs. So,
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
cool.
Anyway.
hopefully we'll see you at the Detroit Book Fest, which is coming up in July.
I probably won't be there.
Oh, too bad.
Sorry.
All right. Well, we'll still we'll carry a sign with your books on it to say, oh,
With my face on it?
yeah, yeah.
Sure.
Awesome.
All right.
All right. Well, Dianna,
thank you
so
for
much.
joining us today. It's been
Oh.
fun.
Yes, thank you.
Loved hearing about your dad and the book. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys. I do appreciate all your support.
Take
I
care.
would hang around and talk, but I got to go talk to this insurance guy now. I'll send you the pictures of what my roof looks like, and then you'll know what I'm talking about.
All right. All right.
All right.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yep, bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to hit subscribe on your favorite podcast service to catch every episode of Life in Michigan. Help us spread the word by rating the show, sharing it with your friends, your neighbors, your family, your mail carrier. Share it with everybody, and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Stay connected by following us on our website and social media. This is a Life in Michigan production. Until next time, take care and have a fantabulous day in Michigan.